Good morning, I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. I am looking forward to spending some time with a recent guest that I had to get back on because I really liked our conversation, and I think we're going to be hearing more from Brian Domitrovic. He is chairman of the history department at Sam Houston State University and a professor there, and a leader, in my opinion, a leader in economic history and economic history thought. And Brian, welcome back to the program. Glad to have you back.
It's really great to be here, Kevin.
Yeah, I over the weekend, there's so much conversation, so much talk about what's happening on the international front. And the reality is that we had a horrific job report last week. And if you take out the economic growth of the state of Texas, you've got a relatively stagnant, ongoing recession that's existed since 2009. Texas, and I can't remember who else, but there's a couple of really awesome sweet spots on the national economy that outside of those, we've had chronic recession since 2009. Yet these stories never get touched. It seems like all they want to talk about is the international front, and of course, even there, the president isn't getting much help. What do you think about that?
The president's tagline that this is the worst recession since the Great Depression, I don't know about that because the stagflation of the 1970s had some recessions that were actually probably a little worse than the ones we had in the mid-2000s. The thing is we know is that it's the worst recovery since the Great Depression. I mean, the Great Depression was a very faulty recovery under Franklin Roosevelt. And this recovery is so bad you have to go all the way back to the 1930s to see something this poor. If you compare it to Ronald Reagan's recovery, it's probably one-third the growth in GDP, one-third the employment growth, no collapse in the inflation rate that leads to a strong dollar. It's just a terrible recovery.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I remember, all the yakking about trickle-down economics. That was the buzzword, and voodoo economics, as the President Reagan's own running mate even called it during the primaries. But the reality is that when you eliminate barriers between people and jobs get created.
There's no question about it. I mean, we know Obamacare alone is increasing taxes, effective taxation on the working class by about 100%. I mean, this is what Casey Mulligan, who wrote the great book on this subject from the University of Chicago, says, the costs that are associated with Obamacare are things that we really haven't seen before from the regulatory apparatus. So add to that his income tax increases, add to that the dollar uncertainty from the Fed, and you'll have the worst recovery in history.
Yeah, or really essentially almost no recovery at all. The first year, maybe two, of the Obama administration, over 80% of all GDP growth, over 80% of it was government-related on some level of government, either the federal government directly or the federal government giving, bailing out state police departments or whatever. I mean, that's like command economies.
Hey, yeah, and the secret to the semi recovery we've been having since 2010 when the Republicans took Congress again is the gridlock in Washington, because what that is, that stalled the further stimulus bills from getting out the door, and that's when we've actually seen the federal share of the economy shrink by a few percentage points. So the only reason we've even had a semi-recovery is the government got slightly out of the way.
Yeah, just a little bit. So here we are, though. You would think that this would be a cakewalk for Republicans, but they don't seem to be able to articulate any type of message that resonates with people. Let's face it, the media, the vast majority of the media, my little radio show does its best, but let's face it, the vast majority of the media out there simply doesn't get it, or they're so in the bath with Obama, they have just simply become a propaganda piece. But it's incredible how poor the accountability the media's had on the president. But I think it's equally bad how poor the GOP has in terms of framing the issues and going after this president.
Yeah, I'm going to blame the Republican Party a bit. I mean, my friend Larry Kudlow, who I'm writing a book with on the John F. Kennedy tax cuts, he just wrote over the weekend, where's your growth message, GOP? Just tell the Americans, what are you talking about? This economy can grow at serious rates, triple the rates it's doing now. We can have abundant prosperity, job creation, business startups if the government gets out of the way. But instead, they're not providing that message. They're just tinkering. So, therefore, the electorate gets bored.
Yeah, no question about it. That's exactly right. And when they do get opportunities, they don't take advantage of them. So why in the world bother voting for more Republicans?
Yeah, Jude Winniski was one of the great founders of supply-side economics back with Arthur Laffer in the 1970s. He had this thing called the political model. And he said if the Republicans don't offer a growth strategy, then the electorate will vote for government and the Democrats. You have to have a growth strategy.
Yep. The Way the World Works is one of the finest books on supply-side economics I've read. And what's really awesome is he wrote it from a journalistic perspective rather than an economist perspective. And, he's right there with George Gilder, who's been one of my favorite guests on my program, and Arthur Laffer in terms of making this really resonate with people. They get it. People get it.
And those guys had to pound on doors and pavement in the 1970s for 13 years until their message finally got stuck with Ronald Reagan. It seems we're in another cycle like that right now. Everyone's caught in this, we're in the stagflation decade, secular stagnation now in the 2000s. Those supply-siders back in the 70s had to fight for over a decade to get their message across, but they got it done, and we should take inspiration from that.
Absolutely. Jack Kemp wrote a great book called American Renaissance, and in that book he talks about in 1972 when Richard Nixon was running against Senator McGovern, thank you very much. When he was running against McGovern in 1972 proposed this thing called a demo grant. A proposal that if you made less than a certain amount of money, I believe it was $5,000 a year, you would automatically get a grant that would raise your income up to $5,000 a year. And what was interesting about that, people think, by the way, that was a lot of people were living on $5,000 a year, including my dad in the early 1970s. That was a reasonable income back then. We kind of look at things through 2014 eyes. But what was interesting is as soon as he proposed that demo grant, his numbers plummeted against Richard Nixon. In fact, and you would think, wow, that, what a neat idea. Wouldn't cost the rich too much, you would think, et cetera. But you know what? It didn't resonate with people because I think a lot of people found it offensive. They wanted to simply to have the ability to make more money, not have this entitlement mentality. But I think we live in a different America. I think Americans are more entitlement-oriented today.
Isn't that fascinating? When you give the electorate the chance at real economic growth and opportunity against the handout, they take the real economic growth. But it has to be a real offer. Hey, Obama is trying to sneak this demo grant thing back into the national conversation. He's talking about these guaranteed contributions to IRAs for low-level workers, a federal account that will automatically have stuff deposited into it. Al Gore had talked about that. We laugh at George McGovern, but boy, are his ideas persistent in his party.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, they're very mainstream now today. He was one of the first candidates to strongly advocate, to get the nomination, socialized medicine. And, and here it is. It's now law.
Yeah, and it's killing low earners in this country. I mean, if you try to improve your situation, say go from $30,000 to $50,000 in yearly income, the penalties that Obamacare hits you with are greater than your increases in income.
Yeah, no question about it. No question about it. I do want to mention before I let you go, time goes so fast whenever we get you on. What's going on over there at your column at Forbes?
Yeah, today it's going to be up in a couple hours. I'm writing about the gold standard. So I was in Salt Lake City last week, and I'm a board member of something called the United Precious Metals Association. You may know that Utah and Oklahoma have passed legislation and signed into law saying that you can use gold as money. And we had a big summit about this with the Attorney General of Utah, and we're going to start, passing this kind of legislation across this country and force the Fed to get serious about it.
Yeah, no question about it. I like your topic better than mine over at Huffington Post. I wrote basically an obituary for Joan Rivers.
We should be talking about culture and comedy instead of this dumb economy. The economy should just be roaring. It's America. We should have these leisure.
The luxury, shouldn't we? We should have the luxury. So now I've been published in politics, business, technology, and now entertainment at Huffington Post, showing how ADD I am. Hey, thanks so much, my friend. Great stuff. Need to check that out. I encourage people to go to the website. Your website again?
It's BrianDomitrovic.com.
People need to go there. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
When we come back, much more for you, and you're listening to The Price of Business.